So, hello everybody. Yeah, really nice winter season also here in Wilhelmshaven. And yeah, I listened today to the news in the radio, and in the end, everything is macroeconomics. So, the reason why I'm late, you see here, is because I'm coming by bike, and on the right, you see what has happened with the bike road. Well, this is due to the fact that cars are much more important for us to come from A to B. Well, then you say, whatever, why has this crazy guy to go by bike when the weather is like this? But why is it about macroeconomics in the news today? I listened also that it was calculated our so-called worldwide carbon budget, and that the carbon emissions this last year also has increased. Still, well, in Europe it's somehow declining, but still, especially in India and China, carbon emissions are increasing. And what is the dependence between this picture and the carbon emissions? Well, if we go to Copenhagen, where also it is a region where you find not that many days in the year that it is snowing. There, the bike roads are the first one which are free in the morning. And do you know what what is the reason that there, not the streets for cars, but the streets or the roads for bikes are the first one in the morning which are free from snow? It's all about the money. Because most people in Copenhagen go by bike to work. And therefore, the reason is that, of course, in a working economy, you want, with the weather like this, that the people will be quite fast at their places to work. Well, and this is the difference between us and Denmark. And of course, I think you can also think about going by car to work means something else to carbon emissions than going by bike. And yeah, well, it was also mentioned that our 1.5 degree aim is, yeah, not achievable anymore. And then we'll see what happens to our nice little planet in the future. And I think especially you have to think about, because you are the young generation, what happens. Okay, but back to business, and I would also again announce the lecture at 10:15 today, when Mr. Christopher Zuer is coming to give us an overview about the economy in Germany, and he is member of the scientific staff of the German Council of Economic Advisors. And I think it will be very interesting to hear something from these experts of economics. So, but now we want to come back to our lecture, and maybe I can finish today what I want to talk about, and then the last week we will do some exercises and some revisions. Well, what have we talked about? Well, we were starting to talk about, yeah, some theory, and there we stepwise, yeah, developed a model in order to explain and describe our whole economy. We started with the Keynesian commodity market, then we introduced the money market and introduced especially interest rates, and Then, of course, also we introduced flexibility of prices, at least some flexibility of prices. And from these assumptions, we deduced at first an aggregate supply curve, which was explained at least by three causes: rigid wages, rigid prices, and especially an explanation via expectations. And from this, we obtained a classical dependence for a supply curve that supply is increasing when prices are increasing. But please keep in mind that this is not an explanation from a micro view, as you have learned it, I think, in semester 2, but it came from these macroeconomic explanations about some rigidity still in the economy, and of course also from some misspecifications which we could do when we are forming our expectations. And then also we looked at the aggregate demand, and aggregate demand comes in this model not surprisingly from our ISLM model, and there we already had introduced prices via the money market, because in the end not the amount of US dollar or the amount of euro is counting, but what we can buy with our money. So real money is counting, and therefore we divided nominal level of money by the price level in the economy. And now we assume that these prices also can adjust. Well, and from this we can then imagine that this just means at the money market that the LM curve is shifting, because this just only changes real money. So it's shifted, a change in price level just shifts the amount of real money. And from this we deduced this falling aggregate demand curve. And again, be careful, although it is the classical dependence as it should be, that increasing income with falling prices, but also this is deduced from a macroeconomic view, from a macroeconomic model. And then we put these together, and of course then the intersection of supply and demand is our overall equilibrium in our economy. Well, and then still we have some rigidities assumed, especially when we have derived our aggregate supply curve. Then we could also ask ourselves what happens if we make the very strong assumption that all prices, wages, interest rates, commodity prices, all prices can directly adjust in our economy, so that we are, so to speak, with an infinite speed always also in our micro equilibrium, as you have learned it in microeconomics or in your business administration courses. So we assume that in every market where we are interchanging goods, always we are with infinite speed just in our equilibrium. And what does this then means to our model? Well, this means in the end that what we are producing depends only, so to speak, on the framework of our economy. How well are we educated? How well is our infrastructure? um, how much resources do we have in our economy? And then we start producing goods and services, and everything is at full speed adjusting in our markets. And this means then that in general, the economy has some level of goods and services which we can produce. And this level depends only on the overall situation, on the overall framework within our economy. And the rest is doing just our price mechanism in the market. Well, and this then means that this aggregate supply curve, yeah, more or less moves to a vertical line, and this vertical line is just situated at these possible level due to our general circumstances in our economy. And remember, we had already, when we had the descriptive part of our lecture, we had already something similar when we talked über potential output. There we also said, well, we have there a long run level, and then our economy is fluctuating around this level, but always we are in the neighborhood of this long run level. And this is then more or less nothing else when we would assume that our market processes under full competition works very well, that we then always very fast adjust to these long run equilibrium, and this we can identify with our potential output. So compare this with potential output. Yeah, and there we already see, when it comes then to economic policy, when we ask in some situations, well, the economy is not doing very well, what we should do, then of course, if we have this point of view, then everything depends on this so-called natural level of output. Everything what we should do should then deal with this general circumstances. Because then we have here a totally inelastic supply, and if we do not change anything down here, the only thing what will happen within our economy is that prices will adjust and nothing else, but not, unfortunately, not the production level. And about the consequences we will talk now, because now we want to talk directly what we have already done in the Keynesian commodity market model and in the ISLM model. What happens in this model if we are doing monetary policy and fiscal policy? And fiscal policy, well, and we will do it together. We will do it in the so-called medium term AD model, where we have still an aggregate supply curve with a positive slope. And then we will talk about what happens with these economic policy measures when we look in the very long term and then we assume this vertical aggregate supply curve. Well, then let's start with the fiscal policy. And still we do plus delta G larger than 0. So what happens if we want to argue stepwise in a first step in our model? So where, in which curve do we directly find the government expenditure? So I have to open the chat. In which curve do we find directly the variable G for government expenditure? Just flip back in your notes or in your slides. Yes, definitely. In the IS, or if we even say in the YD curve in aggregate demand, but then aggregate demand at the commodity market, there the equilibrium is represented by the IS curve. So, and then we argued what happens to the IS curve if we increase government expenditure. What happens? So with this curve happens something. Where do I have to move it? Upwards, yes. So this is moving upwards. IS prime. So, okay. Then we see, of course, well, if we are only in the ISLM model, then we would move to this point. But now we have also the flexibility in prices. So prices can now also adjust. And what is qualitatively behind this and behind the argumentation in which direction prices will adjust? Well, now the enterprises can increase their prices because increasing government expenditure means that demand in our economy is increasing. And if demand is increasing, well, then you have two possibilities as an enterprise to react on this demand. You can increase your production and you can also increase prices. Well, and since we are now looking here at these medium-term AS curve with the positive slope, then we could say that this increase of G shifts IS to the right, but also due to higher demand, enterprises will also increase slightly their prices. Well, and what happens if we now assume that not only production increases, but also prices increases? And think of here in our interest rate and income diagram. So now exclude that we have shifted already the IS curve. Just think what happens within this diagram if prices increase, if we have a higher price level compared to the first one. So this is our starting price level, and now we assume that we have some new price level. P1 is larger than P2, P0, sorry. In which curve in our interest rate income diagram do we find prices as a variable? Well, some minutes ago I talked about this. Look at here. Where do you find the price level? It's just here. And what means if the price level has increased? This means that real money amount is declining. So we come from, if we also take this curve, so this was our starting, M over P0, money supply, and this moves now to the left, M over P1. And this has an impact if we at first, had this LM curve, and now we have a decrease of real money supply, then this means price has risen, yeah, but what happens then to the LM curve? And in which direction I have to move it then? It goes up, yes, because here, look, this is our first equilibrium point with respect to some starting initial income. And this is fixed, and now this income corresponds to this higher interest rate due to the decrease of real money. And this you have to do with all interest rates, and though we obtain a shift to the left or upwards of our LM curve. So going back to this then means the higher price level shifts the LM curve upwards. Well, but an upwards shifted LM curve also shifts upwards our AD curve. Because remember, when we derived the AD curve, we derived it also from the fact when the price level via the money market was changing. So this then means this implies an upwards shift of the AD curve. And here we have our higher price level. So this would be our new medium term equilibrium. So then, let me call this Y1 since we called this P1. P1. Then income has increased to Y1 and prices to P1. And now we also want to argue in the long term. But in the long term, we have to apply our long run AS curve. Production depends only on the general circumstances and we have to apply the vertical long-term AS curve. And this means then that, so to speak, we cannot hold these higher level of income or production because only this one is in the long term possible in our economy. Otherwise, we are overheating. Remember when we talked about the different phases within the business cycle? So then we are, so to speak, within a boom phase, and for some time, we can work more, we can make overtime, we can run our machines more than 100%, but not in the long term. And if there nothing changes, then we have to come back to our natural level of production. Well, and this then means that in the end also the medium term AS curve has also to adjust to the left, and that in the end this means in the long term also the medium term AS curve adjusts upwards and we are back at the natural level of output yn and prices again increases to P2 larger P1 larger P0, and in the end we have only inflation. Because if we have not changed anything down here at the education level in our economy and our infrastructure and everything else, then this is only a short-term or medium-term shock within our economy, and in the long run we just come back to our level what we can produce. Well, and think about the situation we have right now. Only just, give the people within our country the possibility to invest or to change something, but we have not the capacity to produce these things. And this I also heard in the news this morning. Within the sector of semiconductors in Germany, we are looking right now for roughly 80,000 people. So we do not find 80,000 persons to work in the semiconductor production sector in our country. Well, and think of semiconductors. This is all about digital products. If we cannot produce all these digital products, then we also do not have to think about to give the private people support to invest in new heating systems or something else, because for all these investments we need these products, and if we cannot produce these products, then in the long term this will have no impact. So only giving the people money or supporting them in their investment opportunities will not help in the long run. Okay, and then let's talk about monetary policy. So to speak, directly printing money. If the nominal monetary base is increased, which curve do we directly affect? start, of course, again in the upper diagram. Where do we found m as a variable? In which curve? This is the nominal money supply, yes. And so in which curve? LM curve. And in which direction I have to shift the LM curve? If the nominal money supply increases, upwards. Here, remember, we have just, where had I? Here. Here we increased prices, so M over P was decreasing, so real money supply decreases. Now we are increasing M. This, of course, we are not already in the argumentation of prices. Prices are now at this point of the argumentation fixed. So M over P is increasing if we are increasing M. And then the argumentation is just the other way around, that the LM curve has to shift downwards. So this one downwards. So nominal money supply increases, then LM shifts downwards. Well, and now we have, so to speak, the same argumentation as before. Think of the situation. The central bank has started to print money like the central bank has done over the last 10 years until the Ukraine war. Well, then we have more money within our economy. This, without the price adjustments, would just mean that we increase production, but now we have some flexibility in our prices. So also the enterprises can react again with a slight price increase. So this means along the medium term AS curve, prices increase. But what means a price increase again in our diagram, in the first diagram here? Well, this argumentation we had already. Here we argued, due to a fiscal policy, we have a slight price increase here, and this increase of prices shifts upwards the LM curve. Now we started with a downshift of the LM curve, but the impact on the economy is the same. We have also a price increase, so the LM curve has again also shift a little bit backwards due to the increase of the price level. So this shifts the LM curve a little bit back upwards. LM double prime. So here end prices increase, P1 larger than P0. This shifts backwards. The LM curve. And so again, the argumentation is now also that due to this price shift via the AS curve, also the AD curve has to shift upwards. Again, due to higher prices, also AD shifts upwards. Well, and then we have here medium term equilibrium with Y1, P1. But again, and this we can do, I think, a little bit faster now. In the long run AS curve has to be applied. And therefore, in the end, also the AS curve shifts back to the natural level of output. Again, compare fiscal policy AS shifts upward to the natural level of output yn, and we end up only with a price increase to P2, larger P1, larger P0, then production does not change in the long run. We have only inflation. Well, and what is the right view of the economy? All this is what we are now seeing in the discussion in Berlin, in Paris, in Washington, everywhere. What shall we do? Also, at first in these political crises which we have now, and also with our problem of climate change. And what I think that this long run view, there is, very much truth within it. Because just giving, so to speak, ourselves money, because in a democracy, in the end, we decide who is in government, and so in the end, we by ourselves decide if we obtain support for private investment in new heating systems and in e-mobility and whatever. But what I actually think is that it is in the long run all about the circumstances within our economy. And this means what you are doing is, I think, the right choice to educate yourself. Because if we have new ideas, then we can produce more efficient, And this then will increase our opportunities, what we can do in the long run about climate change and whatever. Well, don't misunderstand me. In the short run, everything is also all right to go into the economy and stabilize or push the economy. Yeah, and also we have to yeah, say that this long run view or that this model then applies that if we have perfect competition, and this is also especially within the labor markets. And there we see that price adjustment takes a little bit longer. So in my view, still there is good argumentation that we also intervene within our economy, but we also should not have the hybris that we can, do everything by intervening in the markets. Okay, but I have some time left because now I will also give you a short overview about, more or less directly the so-called neoclassical theory. This is, in the end, nothing else than explaining what is this long-term aggregate supply curve about. So when we have argued here the last step, when we argued in the long term, this is has already been the argumentation in a neoclassical view. But now I want, at the last topic in our lecture, talk about, so to speak, when we are starting the model and talking what is the neoclassical model about. Well, and there at first some assumptions. Well, this is also, remember when we talked in the money topic about the dichotomy of money and the split of real and nominal variables. Well, and not surprisingly, a neoclassical view then mainly focuses on the real values, the real variables. And what we want is that we find an efficient allocation in our economy. And there we assume then that this we find via the market process. And also remember when we derived the money demand, there we had the two different money demand functions, the Keynesian function and the neoclassical function, where we just said, well, behind this is the quantity theory of money, and then money is seen primarily as a medium of exchange just for the transaction of goods and services within our economy. Of course, this is always our assumption in economics. Enterprises are profit maximizers, individuals are utility maximizers, and we just look at fully competitive markets. Well, we know in practice this is a very hard assumption we do not find, but now in our argumentation we assume that this is the case. Well, this I think, or hopefully you have already seen in other courses. Well, we now model our production side with a neoclassical production function, and here we assume more or less three main variables influencing our production. Of course, our classical input factors, capital and labor. And then arguing in the long run, we also introduce a variable A, and this is, so to speak, the variable describing our general circumstances. This is how good is our infrastructure. This is how good is our education system, and so on and so forth. And there we model this quite simple, that we just say we multiply with this general circumstances our production depending on capital and labor. And then we think, well, these production function f increases if inputs are increasing, and this means the first derivative is the first derivative is larger than 0. And we also assume that the second derivative is negative. What does this mean? Well, this means if we are already at a high production level and we add a further unit of input, then we still increase, but the increase is smaller than if we are at a production level which is lower. So the increase is decreasing. And what we also assume is constant returns to scale. This hopefully you also have already heard. This just means doubling output, doubling input means doubling output. Well, and down here I wrote you some specific production functions. I think you also in other lectures have seen already functions like this. This is the linear function. This means just we have perfect substitutes of capital and labor. This means just if we reduce capital by 1 unit, then we can just increase by, let's say, 2 units the labor input, and then we end up in the at the same output level, and that this change is just a constant. This Leontief, hopefully you have also already seen this. In this case, capital and labor are perfect complements. So production is only possible if we have both factors with also fixed relation. And then this really loved function, Cobb-Douglas. I think you have seen this also in the utility as a utility function and production function. This is somehow a function in between these two views of perfect substitutes or perfect complements. And what we can then also show is these so-called constant elasticity of substitution function, and this within this function all these other three functions are just included. Because look at first, if we set, for example, delta equals 1, then here we have just a times k, b times l up to the exponent 1 is, we can skip this, and then we would just end here at perfect substitutes. And then we also can say if delta tends to 0, we end up with the Cobb-Douglas function, and if delta turns to infinity, we come to the Leontief case. So this is just mathematically a general function where we find all our other functions you have already seen mathematically. And if you just estimate then this function in your quantitative model, then you have already included all the other functions. This is then, so to speak, called the working horse if you are doing econometrics. Okay, but yeah, let's look also graphically what I've already told. Um, Positive first derivative, negative second derivative. Well, this just means, let's say we start from 1 worker to 2 worker, then the first increase, delta 1, is much larger than, so to speak, if we come from 10 to 11 workers, that delta y2, the increase is decreasing. So delta y2 is, sorry, smaller this one. Skip 2 is smaller than y1, so the increase is falling, and this means positive but declining marginal productivity. So dy dl is larger than 0 and dy d2y dy squared is smaller than 0. So, and then some evil mathematics. Well, here, this is just revenue, and this is just costs. Well, and profit maximization just means that we have to calculate the first derivative with respect to our input factors. Well, within here, y is a times f of kl. So if we then calculate the first derivative with respect to L and to K, we just obtain the first derivative of profits is then fully competitive markets. Price we have to take a fixed. We cannot do anything about it, so it's just a parameter. So we obtain then P times A times our production function with respect to our input factor equals just the price of our input factor, because costs I times K derivative with respect to K, we end up just with I. And the same holds for labor, and this means in the end that the marginal productivity equals real price of the input factor. So dy with respect to k is just I over p, and dy with respect to L is just wages over p. So this is real interest rates, and this is real wages. Well, and from this, I think this we can do also today. In general, we can then derive that labor demand is just falling in prices. And what is the price? The price is just the real wages in our labor market. And why is this the case? Well, hopefully this diagram you also have already seen. If we just put in a diagram our output depending on L, neoclassical production function, this right-banded function, and omega is nominal wages over P, here we have it, sorry, times L is just a linear line starting in the origin. So the orange line here is just costs, and this is real output. So, and the difference between the blue line and the orange line is just our profit. Well, we want to maximize our profit. So what do we look graphically within our diagram? We just look at the point where the distance between the blue line and the orange line has a maximum. Where do we find this? Well, we find this maximum just when the slope of the blue line has the same slope as the orange line. Well, and what is this again? The slope of the blue line is the first derivative of our production function, so marginal productivity with respect to labor. First derivative of our production function equals the slope of our cost function. What is the slope of our cost function? Well, again, just real wages. So you have also directly without, so to speak, mathematics, just graphically, also derived the first order condition. Well, and now we can say what happens within our diagram if real wages are increasing. So if omega 2 is larger than omega 1. So if wages increasing, then the slope of our cost function is increasing. So this turns left, still starting in the origin. What does this now mean? Well, we obtain another point where the distance now between the red line and the blue line has its maximum. And this due to the assumption that we have this right bending production function has to go to the left. And this just means labor demand with depending on now a higher wage level in our economy is lower. Well, and this then means, not surprisingly, labor demand is decreasing if wages are increasing. Okay, maybe give me, please, some 5 minutes because then I can finish the labor market today. Because now we have labor demand and now we want to argue what is labor supply. Well, labor supply, this is just us. We are supplying labor. If you have finished your studies, then you go to the labor market and you are supplying labor. This you have to keep in mind because sometimes we think about this in the other way. The company is asking for you. They are demanding labor. You are supplying labor. Well, and this we want to do from utility maximization. Well, what do we find in general in our utility function? Well, we want to consume. This is C, consumption. And we are also quite happy if we have spare time. Just sitting around, going to the sea, go for skiing, for example. So, F, spare time. Both are, so to speak, have a positive impact on our utility. The more I can consume, the better, and the more spare time, the better. Well, now the unfortunate thing in our economy is that if I'm working, I have no spare time. But I need to work to consume, because if I work, hopefully I get paid, and with my wage, I can go downtown and go shopping and consume. So what we also assume is that just our income, wage times labor, equals consumption. But we have, so to speak, per day 16 hours, because eight hours we are sleeping. And then we have 16 hours which we can divide into spare time and into go to work. So there we have a restriction, that we have a fixed amount of time which we can spend on spare time and on work time. And this is then that our spare time is just our L bar minus the time L we are working. Well, putting this now together, what does it mean? This means our consumption expenditure equals wage times L. L is also our overall time budget minus our spare time. L bar minus F. And this is then wage times L bar minus wage times F. Let's put this now to the other side. So we obtain P times C plus VF equals wage times L bar. Okay? So dividing by the wage level, we obtain, and this I write now in this kind, V over P. So if we divide this, this would be P over W. And this I can rewrite as 1 over W over P. Why do I write this? Well, this is real wage again. And this just cancels out. Here I write 1 plus F. In a second, you will see why I write 1 equals L bar. And what we want to do is maximize U of C and F. And hopefully, sorry, here the C is missing. Hopefully, you see now some similarity you have already seen. This I can just interpret as the price of consumption. So P1, this is just one good in my utility function times X1. This is, spare time is so-called the numeraire with price 1 plus P2, and spare time is some second good in my utility function. This is my fixed budget of time. Mostly there we write M in economics. I think in your micro course you have written Y. So this is also X1, X2. So what do we have here? This is a fully similar utility maximization as you have done it, I think, 10 times in your microcosm. Just utility maximization from micro. And this I won't redo, I just put the graph. So at first, you just have drawn, I think, your budget line. What do I have to write on the cuts of the axis on my budget line? Y over price. You remember? Income over price. Well, we just look here. Price for F is 1 and budget is L bar. So here I just find L bar. What do I find here? Budget is L bar over the price. The price is 1 over real wages. Since I have divide through the price, I have to multiply by the real wage. So this is real wage omega. V over P. Where do I find my household optimum? Just moving the indifference curve as far outside as possible. So this is my household optimum. Well, and so this is F star, my spare time, depending on, let's say this is 1 omega 1. But F star plus L is L bar. So from this I obtain L star depending on my omega. What happens now if omega increases? Real wages V2 are larger than V1. What happens within our diagram? Yes, so, but this point here is still the same because there nothing happens. So you can, to the right, V2, L. And now, yes, and here now we unfortunately find that we just must admit it depends where it shifts. Because somehow on the right compared to the first situation. So this could be an optimum, but also this could be an optimum. Both possible new optimums. Well, and I know that you have done this also in micro, where IB in the end depends on what is larger, the substitution effect or the income effect. Because in general, we would say, well, if I get more money, then I would assume that I will go to this optimum, because if I'm paid more, then I will increase my work. So I would then reduce my spare time. Possible, but also this is possible. Why is this also? Why we can also well argue that this is also possible. Well, think of, you are a quite rich person. You have already 10,000 euros per month. Then a guy comes to you and say, well, now you get paid 12,000 euros per month. Then you can think, well, I'm happy with 10,000. if you pay me 12,000, I can decrease my work time and I have still 10,000 euros. And this is the income effect. And so it depends if we really obtain in the end this positive dependence, increasing labor. If wages are increasing, depends what is larger, the substitution effect. At first, we mostly directly think of this substitution effect. But there's also this income effect. And when this income effect is larger, then we would even decrease labor if wages are increasing. But now we are in macroeconomics. And what do we find, unfortunately? In our income distribution, we do not find that much rich people in our income distribution, which are already happy with what they have. So we have much more people in our economy in general where we can assume that the substitution effect is larger than the income effect. But this is now only an assumption. We assume that the substitution effect is larger than the income effect, and then we can argue here from this utility maximization that we obtain just an increasing supply function of labor, and then I will stop. Putting these two functions together, we obtain the labor market equilibrium, and the rest of the neoclassical model I will show you next week. Because on Thursday we have again a strategic workshop of the economics department, so no lecture on Thursday. But I will announce this also in the Moodle course. So then, thank you very much for today.